6 men are above us. Not falling, being lifted. One moment they are rowing beside me, the next they are hanging over the deck, kicking at empty air. There are 6 long necks coming from the cliff. A man in every mouth. On the other side of the ship, the sea is vanishing into a hole. "Keep rowing!" That is what Odysseus shouts. Not help them, not turn back, keep rowing. The man beside me has shared an oar with me since Troy. I can see his hand reaching down. I reach up, our fingers miss. Then he is gone. Odysseus has not told us is that he knew this would happen. He knew 6 men would be taken. He decided we would row faster if we did not. To explain how we ended up trapped between a monster and a whirlpool, I need to go back to the day we won the war. Because when we left Troy, we thought the dangerous part was over. Blindness. We were wrong. I had been away for 10 years. I had grown up. When I left Ithaca, my daughter could barely say my name. By the time Troy fell, I no longer knew whether she would recognize me. Still, I believed I was going home. We all did. Troy was burning behind us. The Greeks had finally broken through its walls, and Odysseus was the man everyone credited with finding the way inside. The wooden horse. His idea. After 10 years of failed attacks, Odysseus had won the war with a lie. At the time, that made him seem like the safest man in the world to follow. 12 ships sailed under his command, hundreds of men from Ithaca and the surrounding islands. With favourable winds, home was weeks away. Before a years later, Odysseus reached it alone. This is how the rest of us disappeared. Our first stop was Ismarus, home of the Cicones. We were not blown there by a storm. They did not attack us. We attacked them. Killed the men defending the city, emptied their houses, and divided the spoils. Troy had ended, but we were still behaving like an army. Odysseus ordered us back to the ships. Some men listened. Most kept drinking. There was wine, fresh meat, and more to take. After 10 years of war, it felt like victory was supposed to look like this. Then the Cicones returned with reinforcements. They drove us toward the shore. By the time we pushed the ships into the water, 6 men from every vessel were dead. Soon journey had properly begun. We called them unlucky. We did not call ourselves responsible. A storm raised us away from the route home. For 9 days we sailed on the open sea. For 9 days we saw nothing but rough water and unfamiliar sky. Then we found an island where the people offered our scouts a fruit called lotus. Only 3 men ate it. They did not become sick. They became peaceful. When we found them, they knew who we were. They remembered Ithaca. They understood that their families were waiting. They simply no longer cared. Odysseus had them dragged back to the ships and tied beneath the benches. At the time, I thought he was being cruel. Later, I understood. The lotus did not kill a man. It took away the part of him that wanted to return. And there would be many times when going home became harder than staying lost. The land of the Cyclops looked safe. There were goats, fresh water, and more the channel, smoke rose from another shore. Policing Odysseus wanted to investigate. He chose 12 of us and carried a skin of wine strong enough to make an ordinary man forget his own feet. I was one of the 12. We found a cave filled with cheese, milk, and pens of young animals. The men wanted to take what we could carry and leave. Odysseus refused. He wanted to meet the owner. Expected a guest gift. That was the rule among civilized people. A stranger enters your home, you feed him, shelter him, and only then ask who he is. Zeus guards strangers. Everyone knows that. Then we heard the sheep returning. The creature entering behind them had to stoop beneath the stone. He was not simply a large man. He was something built for a world larger than ours. Polyphemus, a Cyclops. He drove the sheep inside and rolled a boulder across the entrance. It was a stone none of us could have moved together. He saw us near the fire and asked who we were. Odysseus told him we were Greek soldiers returning from Troy. He asked for the hospitality owed to travellers. Polluted Polyphemus laughed. He did not fear Zeus. Then he reached down, grabbed two men by the legs and struck them against the ground. Slowly. When he finished, he drank his milk and lay down to sleep. Drew his sword, then he stopped. If we killed the Cyclops, we would never move the stone. We would die inside the cave with him. So we waited. In the morning, Polyphemus ate 2 more men before taking his sheep outside. He sealed the cave behind him. 4 men gone. Odysseus searched the cave and found a length of olive wood. We sharpened one end and hardened it in the fire. When Polyphemus returned that evening, he ate another 2. Half of our group was dead. Odysseus offered him the wine. The Cyclops drank 1 bowl, then demanded another. After the 3rd, his words began to loosen. Asked Odysseus his name. Nobody, Odysseus told him. Lafayette laughed and promised that, as a guest gift, he would eat nobody last. Confiscated. Then he collapsed. We heated the olive stake until its point glowed. 5 of us lifted it. Odysseus guided the tip. We drove it into the Cyclops' eye. Polyphemus screamed so loudly that other Cyclopses came running. They gathered outside the sealed entrance and asked who was attacking him. "Nobody!" he shouted. "Nobody is killing me." The others told him that if nobody was killing me, with ever Thorwes pointed, we always this. The odd word filling them name, but nobody was chacking him. The others told him, we wilt be short by the way the Dillone life. Thankly the Cyclopses move. The first for the confidencer, with a nobody was looking up. The member that he believed told him that if nobody was hurting him, then his suffering must have come from the gods. Understood how clever it was. That was the danger of following Odysseus. Just when you began to hate him, he did something that saved your life. At dawn, Polyphemus moved the stone and sat across the entrance. He felt the backs of his sheep as they passed beneath him. Odysseus tied each of us under an animal. The Cyclops touched the wool above. We held our breath below. One by one, the sheep carried us into the light. We ran for the shore and launched the ship. Polyphemus followed our voices and hurled a rock toward us. It struck the water behind the stern, and the wave nearly pushed us back onto the beach. We rowed harder. We were alive. We had escaped. Then Odysseus stood at the rear of the ship and shouted back. Every man begged him to stop. He ignored us. He told the Cyclops that if anyone asked who had blinded him, he should tell them it was Odysseus, destroyer of cities, king of Ithaca. For a moment, the Cyclops said nothing. The first wait me returned to the Cyclops' roam. It wasn't face. Then he lifted his hands toward the sky. Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, the god whose sea we still had to cross. He asked his father to prevent Odysseus from reaching home. And if Odysseus had to return, he asked that he arrive late, alone and broken, after losing every man who sailed beside him. The prayer followed us across the water. My admiration for Odysseus did not end that day, but something cracked. We had escaped because he could not bear to remain nobody.
Eventually Aeolus, keeper of the winds. For a month he fed us and listened while Odysseus told stories about Troy. When we departed, Aeolus placed every dangerous wind inside a leather bag and tied it shut. He left only the west wind free to carry us home. Odysseus did not explain this to the crew. For 9 days and nights he controlled the ship himself. The 10th day we saw Ithaca. Not a distant shadow. Home. flushing gore. Burning along the hills, men began shouting the names of villages. Some claimed they could see fields belonging to their families. I knew one of the slopes. My house stood beyond it. My daughter was somewhere on the other side. Odysseus finally fell asleep. The leather bag rested beside him. We knew Aeolus had given him gifts. We had watched kings and commanders divide treasure since Troy, and we knew how often the best pieces stayed with the leader. Say the bag contained gold. Another said silver. I did not open the knot. I also did not stop them. The winds exploded across the deck. The sail tore sideways. Men were thrown from their feet. Ithaca vanished behind rain and darkness. We tried to close the bag, but there was nothing left inside it. Odysseus woke and stared at the empty horizon. For one moment, I thought he would throw himself into the sea. Instead, he covered his face. The storm carried us all the way back to Aeolus, when he refused to suffer this much unless the gods despised him. So we rowed. For 6 days there was no wind, only oars, blisters, and the sound of men blaming one another. On the 7th day, we found a harbour surrounded by high cliffs. 11 ships sailed inside and tied themselves along the shore. Odysseus kept ours outside the entrance. He sent scouts toward the settlement. Only one came running back. Behind him were the Laestrygonians. Until they began lifting rocks. The first stone landed where one of our ships had been, not beside it, where it had been. More ships split beneath them. Men jumped into the water and were speared as they tried to swim. The entrance filled with wreckage. The vessels inside could not turn. They could not row past one another. They could not escape. The Laestrygonians gathered the dead from the water as though pulling fish from a net. My brother was on the 4th ship inside the harbour. I never saw him die. His ship disappear. Odysseus cut our mooring line, and we rowed away while 11 vessels were destroyed behind us. A fleet deported as ship, carrying everyone who remained. Men kept staring back long after the harbour vanished. I did too. I had spent 10 years imagining what I would say to my family when I reached Ithaca. Now I had to imagine telling them why my brother would not. We reached another island and stayed beside the ship for 2 days. Nobody wanted to explore. Odysseus divided us into 2 groups and shook lots from a helmet. Eurylochus led the group chosen to go inland. I went with him. Stone house, surrounded by wolves and lions. The animals did not attack us. They approached like dogs. A woman was singing inside. Her name was Circe. She invited us to eat. Eurylochus remained outside. The rest of us entered. The food tasted normal. The wine did not. My hands changed first. My fingers pressed together. My arms shortened. My body folded toward the floor. I tried to shout, but the sound that came out was an animal's cry. Circe drove us into a pen. The worst part was not the transformation. It was that my mind remained mine. I knew what she had done. I knew the pigs beside me were men I had fought with. I knew she could understand our fear. Eurylochus escaped and warned Odysseus. Odysseus returned alone. Hermes had given him a plant that protected him from Circe's magic. When her spell failed, Odysseus drew his sword and forced her to swear she would not harm him. Not she changed us back. Then she fed us, cooked her own meat, bathed us and gave us proper beds. We stayed for a year. At first we needed time to recover. Then the wine kept arriving. Nobody was hunting us. Nobody was being crushed, eaten or drowned. For the first time since Troy, we woke without immediately wondering who would die before sunset. Comfort became another kind of island. Eventually, the crew reminded Odysseus that we still had homes. He agreed to leave. Circe told him there was one place we had to visit first: the land of the dead. That night, Elpenor, the youngest man among us, drank too much and fell asleep on the roof. At dawn, he heard the crew preparing to leave. He stood up, forgot where he was, and stepped into empty air. His neck broke. None we had looked out since so for the surface group. We sailed away without burying him. I dug a trench and poured offerings into it. He sacrificed animals over the opening. Then the dead came. They gathered around the blood. Soldiers from Troy, old men, women, children. People whose names had already disappeared from the living world. Odysseus held them back with his sword until the prophet Tiresias approached. But before Tiresias, Odysseus saw Elpenor, had left lying on Circe's roof. Elpenor begged us to return, burn his body, and raise his oar above the grave. Then Tiresias drank from the trench. He warned Odysseus that Poseidon had not forgiven him. He said there was still a path home, but only if we left the cattle of Helios untouched. If anyone harmed them, our ship would be destroyed. The crew would die. Odysseus would return alone. Iresius, another spirit, approached. Odysseus stopped moving. It was his mother. She had been alive when he left Ithaca. Nobody had told him she was dead. I watched Odysseus reach for her, his arms closed around nothing. He tried again. Nothing. Still nothing. Until that moment, I had thought Odysseus believed himself clever enough to escape every consequence. In the land of the dead, there was nothing to trick. No knot to untie. No false name to give. No monster to blind. His mother was gone. For the first time, I saw him look like one of us. We returned to Circe's island and buried Elpenor. His oar stood above the grave. Then Circe told us what waited ahead. Singers who could pull men from their ships. Passage between two monsters. An island covered in cattle we were forbidden to touch. By then, these instructions barely sounded strange. That was how far from ordinary life we had travelled. Said the Sirens killed sailors with their voices. Not because they promised love, because they promised knowledge. They knew what had happened at Troy. Man who had fought there. They claimed to know everything happening across the earth. Odysseus wanted to hear them. We softened beeswax and pressed it into our ears. Then we tied him upright against the mast. His order was simple. No matter what he did, we were not to release him. As we approached the island, the sea became calm. I could not hear the sirens. I could hear only the dull pressure of my own breathing and the rhythm of the oars. But I could see Odysseus. At first, he listened. Then his body went rigid. He pulled against the ropes. He shouted something we could not hear. When nobody moved, he began to beg. The man who had stood in front of a Cyclops twisted against the mast like someone trapped in a fire.
we tightened the knots. On the shore beyond him lay the remains of other sailors, bones whiting rowing. When the island disappeared, we removed the wax. Odysseus would not repeat everything the Sirens had sung. He said only that they knew his name. That always seemed to be enough for him. Ahead was the narrow passage Circe had warned us about. Charybdis on one side, Scylla on the other. Charybdis swallowed the sea several times a day. If the ship entered the current at the wrong moment, nothing would return. Scylla lived inside the opposite cliff. 6 long necks, 6 mouths. 6 men taken from every passing vessel. Circe had explained the choice to Odysseus. Lose 6 men or lose the ship. He put on his armour and carried 2 spears. Circe had already warned him that weapons were useless. Perhaps holding them made him feel less like a man deciding which 6 of us would die. The sound of Charybdis came first. The sea began to fall away beside us. We saw black rock beneath the water. Every man looked towards the whirlpool. That was when Scylla attacked. 6 heads descended from above. The man beside me had shared an oar with me since Troy. He had helped lift the stake when we blinded Polyphemus. He had been a pig beside me in Circe's pen. His hand reached down. I reached up. Brightness missed. Then he was gone. Odysseus kept shouting for us to row. Later, he would say it was the most terrible thing he witnessed during the journey. At the time, he did not show that. With an interest trick, I row the bow. We reached the island of Helios. His cattle moved across the fields in perfect herds. Circe had warned us. Tiresias had warned us. Odysseus made every man swear not to touch them. Eurylochus argued that we could not remain at sea during the storm. Willingness. He was right. We landed. Then the wind trapped us there for a month. At first, we ate the supplies Circe had given us. Then we caught fish, championships, then birds. Eventually, there was nothing. The cattle remained in the fields. Fastball, healthy, telecommunications, fed. Kenneth cold so badly that I could not sleep. Men stopped speaking because speech required strength. Some could no longer stand without help. I thought about my daughter. When I left Ithaca, she had wrapped her entire hand around one of my fingers. I had spent 12 years telling myself I would feel that hand again. By then, I could no longer picture her face. Odysseus went inland to pray. The gods placed him into a deep sleep. While he was gone, Eurylochus gathered us. He said starvation was the worst possible death. At least death would be quick. If we somehow reached home, we would build Helios the finest temple on Ithaca. Nobody truly believed that would save us. Anyway. I helped. That matters. Things from us. His pride brought Poseidon against the ship. But nobody forced the knife into my hand. We sacrificed the finest animals. There was no barley, so we scattered oak leaves. There was no wine, so we poured water. Then the hides began to move. The meat on the spits made sounds like living cattle. Cooked flesh bellowed above the fire. Odysseus woke and smelled the smoke. He knew before he saw us. On the 7th, the wind changed. We launched. The island vanished behind us. Black clouds covered the sky. Zeus struck the ship with lightning. The mast split and fell across the deck. The hull rolled beneath us. Every man entered the sea. I saw Odysseus tie pieces of the broken ship together. I tried to swim toward him. A wave rose between us. For a moment, I thought about calling his name. Then I remembered all the men who already had. The sea closed over me. We left Troy with 12 ships, hundreds of men. War, storms, giants, witches, the dead and monsters. But survival was never something we achieved together. Odysseus did after the rest of us were gone.
The crewman's story ends there. Odysseus's does not. Odysseus survived. He drifted to the island of Calypso, who kept him there for 7 years. When the gods finally ordered his release, Poseidon destroyed his raft. The Phaeacians found him, sheltered him, and asked him to reveal his identity. Odysseus answered by telling the story of his journey. The Cicones, the Lotus Eaters, Polyphemus in his cave, Aeolus and his bag of winds, the harbour of the Laestrygonians, Circe, the land of the dead, the Sirens, Ella and Charybdis, the cattle of Helios. The extraordinary adventures at the centre of the Odyssey reach us largely through Odysseus's own account. Then, every member of his crew who could challenge that account was dead. The poem does not say that Odysseus invented the monsters. Within its world, they are real. Is also a master of disguise and persuasion. After reaching Ithaca, he repeatedly creates convincing false identities for himself, changing his story depending on who is listening. His account never completely hides his own failures. He enters the Cyclops' cave when his men want to leave. He reveals his name after escaping. He hides Scylla's attack from the men who will be taken. But he is also the only person left to decide how those failures will be remembered. Odysseus eventually returns to Ithaca, reunites with his son, and reclaims his home. His journey becomes a legend about intelligence, endurance, and the determination to return. Of men left Troy beside him, one man came home, and the complete story belonged to the survivor. The Odyssey asks us to admire the man clever enough to return. It leaves us with one question for everyone who did not. What would the dead have called him?